Zamero. Some of you may, probably maybe all of you are aware of this project, as it's been around for a long time, since I think 2000, and of which I'm acutely, almost painfully aware of, because I was one of the finalists in a design competition for this project back then. Didn't win, but this is perhaps one example of why it's always good to never burn your bridges, because sometimes, who knows, it might come back, and that's the case here. We got a second chance at this project. There was a long story, I don't know all the details, but there was an architect selected in the first design competition, which was a traditional design and then bid project. And for reasons I'm not fully aware of, there were issues with program and budget alignments, and this never came together. So that project was stopped about 2 years ago, and the GSA decided to, it was desperately needed as a project. The GSA decided to reissue it as a design-build project, so that there was essentially a guaranteed or warranted price that would be met, meeting their budget, and also a program. And so this was a design-build design competition. So the idea was to set a budget which was about 300 and I should know this like everything. It was $320 million, $318 million, and then each of the teams was asked to propose their design to meet that budget, and of course it was quite a onerous thing, because the builder, the contractor with each of these design build teams had to basically warranty or guarantee that that they would be able to meet that budget with the design that was shown and produced. So it was really a quality-based competition, design competition, but with a very fixed budget and a combined team of architect and builder. For us, our partner is Clark Construction, and there's a group that we've worked with on on some other design build projects. And if anyone's interested in talking about design build later on, we can do that. It's not what we normally do, but it is with the right partner, right teammate. We found it can be a very productive and very rewarding process, and quality is not sacrificed given the right conditions at the beginning. So we were awarded this project after the design competition 10 months ago this year. The project is now in construction, so it's fast. And of course, we are still working on the final details of the design as the hole is being dug and preparations for foundations being made. So when we began this, we're the beneficiaries of a very enlightened group of judges who are working on this project, who represent the courts for this, and of course the GSA as well. And the GSA, of course, this is a design excellence project, so this was for us an important thing. We wouldn't have probably pursued it if it weren't a primary issue with the GSA. But Judge Margaret Morrow, who's articulated these 10 points, is the leader of the Judicial Building Committee, and she's a very, very enlightened person, along with her colleagues in this, and has been just a really wonderful advocate and colleague on this project. These are the points. I won't read them, but they're ones I'm sure resonate with everyone in this room. They certainly do with us. And they, in some ways, could be probably summed up by Vitruvius, 2,000 years ago, in three words: firmness, commodity, and delight was basically it. Although with sustainability, which is a critical issue here of the 21st century, of course, we all confront. So when we began this, I'm going to show you basically images that I presented in the design competition. The building looks just like this, as you'll see. We made a few refinements, a number of refinements actually, that along the way. But what you see here is basically what I showed the judges when we interviewed for this. So it'll give you a sense also of the kind of presentations that we do, at least when we interview for these kinds of design competitions. And I think for these kinds of projects, it's always important to remind ourselves and also the judges and our clients about the kind of the basis, the cultural basis on which these buildings are built. And so the elements of civic architecture and really defined well by Senator Moynihan who really developed the federal building program in a way that was focused on making architecture that really amounted to something. It was really about our place in time, about quality, and about not copying others, not copying history, but rather doing the best that we could do in this in this moment in time. But we also, very, very important in my mind, in our minds, to reflect on what is making a civic building means. And there are certain principles, despite the fact that we're in a new century, that remain, I would argue, very important. And including the idea that there is a separation from the commercial realm for a civic building, that there is a place of public gathering that allows for democratic expression, that there is a certain elevation perhaps in the entry datum line that elevates a important civic building like a courthouse from the public realm, and that on the inside that there are generous, well-proportioned spaces, and ideally a central space also is naturally lit, that daylight's a key part of these spaces. And finally, of course, when most courthouses we reflect upon built in the last century and a couple of centuries before in U.S. history, they were typically the biggest, most prominent, and often the skyline-defining element in the towns and cities in which they were located. And so it is important, I think, today as well that a courthouse reflect this civic presence, that it not be confused with a commercial building on the skyline of the city. So this particular project is in Los Angeles, of course, a very, very prominent site near the City Hall, which is the defining Beaux-Arts building, bilaterally symmetrical, part, again, of kind of what civic architecture in the civic district of Los Angeles might mean, and a very, very important key iconic element, which should be the dominant piece in the civic center of Los Angeles. Not the federal presence, but rather the local municipal presence we felt was very important. So we wanted to honor that and not in any way, shape, or form try to outdo City Hall, if you will. Also important to note that next to this are some massive new commercial developments being proposed. What you see on the left there is Frank Gehry's proposal for Grand Avenue. Of course, you recognize the Disney Hall in the foreground of the model photograph, this Frank's building, of course. And so Grand Avenue, just one block away from that red box, which is our site, is a very, very important and key cultural corridor of Los Angeles. And that corridor is and will continue to be a sponsor or kind of a seed, if you will, for more mixed-use development around it, including the very tall buildings you see in that model photograph next to that red box, our site. So in thinking specifically about the site itself and how a new courthouse might engage its physical surroundings, it is directly adjacent to City Hall, and of course that famous cupola that we just saw. Off City Hall is what used to be called City Hall Plaza. It's now called the Grand Park, I guess it is, off of Grand Avenue. And our relationship to that and that very clear symmetrical condition there, and the green that comes into this, we felt it was very important that we bring a quality of the civic presence of the landscape of the civic district into our site in some fashion, and that we honor and respect and somehow maybe physically acknowledge the presence of again City Hall, and that great cupola is this diagonal relationship from the corner of Broadway and First Street on our roughly speaking southwest corner. And important to note, of course, there are many civic buildings around this district, but with it also a mixed-use district, as I mentioned. So we wanted to find ways to engage that, consider, of course, the practical issues about vehicular access. These four major streets on the left is 2nd Street and then First Street to the right, Hill and Broadway. The two streets coming down vertically, 2nd and First. 2nd, as you may know, goes into a tunnel. It cuts under what used to be Bunker Hill, and First comes down and over that topography and down. So First has a very steep topography, sloping upwards from Broadway up to Grand Avenue, and Hill and Broadway are about a story apart, about 20 feet apart in elevation. So for access, ideally these 4 points of access would be possible. However, these two, First and 2nd, not possible because of certain city traffic conditions and because of the desire that we have of making First Street really the very clear civic corridor that links to Grand Avenue down to City Hall. So we felt it was very important to have two vehicular entries off of Hill and Broadway for security reasons and for practicality, and also to acknowledge both the existing and emerging new mass transit conditions next to the site. So First Street is especially well served by buses and also by metro. New metro lines along Broadway and Hill, all of which can converge on First Street for a really important front door, if you will, for the courthouse, and the opportunity to create this place of civic gathering, perhaps off of First Street. One of the other really important practical issues, of course, in any courthouse today or almost any government building, is the necessity of removing yourself from physical threat from blasts around the street. And so there is a requirement of a 20-foot setback from the property line. We are actually, and 50 feet is actually preferred because that simply is a way to remove yourself from potential blasts. So those are really critical points in the site planning. When we did this, of course, we're doing this in the absence of any discussions with the judges. It was a design competition, no contact whatsoever. I think we were able to ask some questions. So we thought it was important to show the judges in our interview for this project the considerations we'd taken in coming up with our scheme. It wasn't just like, oh, here's the idea, it came up one night and there it is, but rather the sort of deliberative process that any architect goes through to arrive at a conclusion. So of the various things we looked at, we showed them these 4 different ideas and explained to them why we felt that our scheme was the right ideas we proposed. So beginning with the idea of 6 courtrooms per floor, which would be highly efficient, but would have issues about, and 6 courtrooms lined up like that, would have issues about a small civic presence on First Street and relationship to a future federal office building, which I should have said is part of the requirements was to provide a site on this site for a future federal office building that might be built at some point in time. And then, of course, also there were limited setbacks and vehicular access not so great, and a lot of secure elevators, which would have been very expensive to operate and maintain and to build. We also looked at the idea of 4 courtrooms for 4 arranged along First Avenue, which would be, again, highly efficient and would give us a very strong presence on First Street and good site access. However, it would be really a problem to have any kind of secure setbacks given the length of that footprint. So that was also discarded. And finally, an idea looking at creating a very small footprint that would have a great setback on all sides, that would have plenty of site access, but in a tall building in which you'd have only 2 courtrooms per floor, there are problems with, as you know if you've worked on courthouses, that even though it's efficient to do this, it's inefficient in terms of the skin you have to build around a small footprint like this. Also inefficient to operate over time because you have to secure all these floors. And so not the best from a point of view of that. And very importantly, we thought was that a building of this scale becomes almost like a skyscraper. And we've all seen a lot of courthouses, a number of courthouses, or high-rise courthouses. It's a challenge to bring a civic presence to a building of that kind of scale, especially when you think about the tall buildings that would be joining this in the neighborhood. And finally, as I mentioned, the staffing would be significant, far outstripping the cost of building the building is running a building like this over the first 25 or 30 years. So for those reasons, we put that aside as well. And I have to say, happily, we found out later on, our competitors all thought that was a great idea to do that. So, made a somewhat easy decision, I think, for the jury. But in the end, what we were advocating is to create 4 courtrooms per floor. But as opposed to doing what, if you've worked on courthouses recently, we've worked on 3 or 4, I guess 4, state courthouses. Many of them, the party is having the public circulation on one side, the courtrooms lined up, and then the judges, the chambers on the back side. Makes for a very clear party, but it stretches it out. We thought here if we could actually bring 4 courtrooms per floor, but have them vertically or have them paired in a way that they are adjacent to one another, resulting in a mass, a form that is like a platonic solid, a cube in this case. We'd have a very good skin ratio, so again, budget was really critical in this. Really important thing. This budget is way less than most federal courthouses have been built in the last few decades. Provide for setbacks on all sides. It would give a strong street presence and vehicular access, and very importantly, it would have this powerful civic form. It really is distinguished from its commercial neighbors. So when we thought about then how we take this partie and make sure it really is a part of this city of Los Angeles, of course, you begin with the city grid in which it's located, and a Cartesian grid like this. That's this part of Los Angeles. The interesting nuance about this part of LA, though, is that the street grid is actually turned. It's not on the cardinal points. It's turned 38 degrees off of north. And therefore, if you organize the building like this, as we do, you have a block that has a sun that is on all four sides throughout the year. So thinking about how to make this a really energy efficient building, and by the way, energy efficiency was a huge issue here. In fact, one of the challenges was to try to make this a net zero building from an energy point of view, and I'll get into that in a moment. But so certain challenges about doing that because of the diagonal organization relative to the sun. So we get a lot of solar heat gain on all four sides. So our scheme is to take that grid and take the city street grid and take the orientation of the sun and actually literally fold the facade in a way that it responds to providing views on one hand, but also blocking the sun through actually creating sun screens on the opposing leg of these triangles that conceptually would form the facade. So it provides the opportunity for a great deal of views and for light inside the building, and yet reduces by 47% the solar radiation within the structure itself. So a very simple move, but one that's very effective and is one of the main character-giving qualities of the building itself beyond its basic shape. And so this became the organizing idea in the facade. This, as you see here, is a study model of that facade. And the idea is to make it, to give it a great deal of lightness and complexity. As the sun moves around it, it will constantly change, and while achieving these environmental ends. And so there are 2 or 3 different basic components here, all of which are based upon this triangular shape. So the piece that you see here is one with solar shading. As you see, the sun is blocked. You can see out of it on the other side. Then there are pieces that are for 100% view in certain areas of public spaces in which we have light and views on both sides. And then we have some that are for the plenum areas and also other certain shaded areas in which we have a solid insulating panel on the hypotenuse side of this triangle, allowing the light to come through a series of kind of a sun screen element. All these have the same kind of a sun lattice screen that provides a kind of a delicate shade and shadow and completely screens the sun out. So here's a detail of this, and this was really important. We, in the design competition, if you can imagine doing a folded skin like this, is not what you think of as the most economical way to do a skin. And so we worked very closely with not just the general contractor, but also with the subcontractor, the glass provider, in this case it's Benson, to develop the details for this and to verify the price of this, because it's a significant part of the cost of the building, but before we submit our competition entry. So this is a huge part of confirming the validity of this. But you can see that an important point of this is that with the sunscreen elements that we've developed, there's a great deal of richness provided simply by the way light and shadow passes across the facade and changes throughout the day. So here's just a kind of rendering. It's hard, as you know, to represent glass fully in renderings because it's such an ephemeral material. But the different qualities around the building are reflected in the kind of lattice and the complexity within that triangular system. So you kind of see a large square represented there. That actually is reading through to the judge's chambers walkway that connects to the courtrooms. And the chambers on the side, they come out directly to the window. So there's certain depth in some areas and that changes based upon the orientation and the use. At the very top of the building, we'll talk about in a moment, is a hat truss that performs a very, very unique role for this building. This building is probably one of the safest, at least conceptually, in the state, maybe the country, from the point of view of blasts as well as from earthquakes, because of a fairly unique structural system, which I'll tell you about. But we've used that to create a crown at the top of the building that has a certain amount of luminosity during the day and also as it will be lit in the evening. So throughout the day, the quality of light on this facade will change. In the morning, more solid perhaps, and as it gets light on it, it transforms again. And as you get light from within, of course, it changes again. So it's a constantly evolving quality. As you look to the north, where we're facing First Street, the front door, we'll show you the plan in a moment, where this opens up to the interior to reveal the light court that's within. And it's a space also that has some very special rooms that you can sit in that are looking out onto the street. So this becomes a very important centering device. We're working with Lonnie Israel, our head of our graphic studio, on an idea in which the seal is represented as a sort of a abstracted piece, a super graphic, or the front of this as part of the fold system. So that kind of dematerializes, rematerializes as you look at it, and reconstitutes itself, and you can see the front door here. So again, north facade, the same idea. It changes throughout the day, eventually revealing very clearly inside what's going on. So the solar strategies were really at the heart of this building's facade and its basic design. And it's both the four sides, but also the fifth facade on the roof is very much a part of this. The rooftop is a solar harvesting, energy harvesting piece. So we have turned the photovoltaics on the top to meet exactly the cardinal points to maximize the efficiency of the photovoltaics, and perforated a center light court in the middle that brings light all the way down into the public space in the center, and also provides light in the public spaces around, adjacent to the courtroom. So you can see the way light will come in here in the spring and in the equinox, and then and it changes throughout the year. So the civic spaces are all based around this center light court, beginning in the very middle, and then flanked by the civic plaza here at the front door on First Street, and then linked to this courtyard garden. So the security line is here, and so to the right of this, everything is open to the public, and then to the left, you're actually through the secured environment. So once you pass security in the light court, you can freely move back and forth into this garden courtyard, which is actually activated on one side on the top here by the cafe that serves the public. There's also a secured judges cafe and jury assembly, the two really important public spaces that has a lot of churn. We thought it was really important for them to be able to get outside the building, use this outdoor space in Los Angeles, and have that courtyard as something that activates and links both of them as an outdoor idea. And finally, from within this light court, the key public elements are intuitively, visually clear. Many people come here who don't speak or read English, and so we want to make sure that things are intuitively clear. So as you walk in the front door, you can instantly see that the elevators that provide access to all the courtrooms are on one side, special proceedings courtroom on the right, and jury assembly straight ahead. So it's a very clear piece. One thing I should point out is that this red outline here is actually we'll call it the drip line of the building. So you can see that actually a substantial part of this building, at the grade level at least, is held way inside of that piece. And I'll show you how we get there in a moment in the structure. But what this allows us to do is to have a building that really has no back door. We have public spaces all the way around. The space that is reserved on the far left of that drawing is the space for the federal office building in the future. And in the interim, it's just going to be a grassy space. We would love to make this a park, but we all know what it's like when you give the public a park that you never see. It's going to be that forever. So it is. We'll have a fence around it, regrettably, but that's on the Second Avenue side. The other three sides are all open to the public. We have the main civic plaza here on First. We have, and this plaza has, I mentioned, two staircases because again the hill is sloping this direction. We have a major civic staircase here at the upper right-hand side that connects hill and down to a plaza, and then sloping downward this way down to Broadway, second set of civic steps that has this very strong diagonal relationship with City Hall in this direction. Flanking then south and north are these two major outdoor gardens, both of which are accessible to the public. You can see the line that traverses on both of these. This is a wheelchair accessible inclined plane that traverses across this stepping garden that allows you to get from this very, the lowest point, Broadway, up to this plaza, and likewise down from Hill Street down to our plaza. It's interesting that the basic sidewalk, the public sidewalk, does not meet ADA requirements because it's too steep. So this allows us to bridge that. For a long time, we're looking at schemes of elevators and everything else, but we're able to develop finally a scheme that is, I think, a really good one because it brings the public into these gardens and makes the gardens and the civic space a really key part of it. You'll notice that on top of the jury assembly room over here and the cafe, also you see shrubbery. These are actually also green roofs, and so the entire topography, this low-rise portion, is planted as part of the stormwater mitigation plans for the building. We are using zero water for irrigation on this project. It's all through recycled water and retention. We do have two small water basins as you enter the front door. So for those of you who know courthouses well, you know that you have to provide a secure sally port, a very key piece of this. And this is in a separate pavilion that comes in and out, has a minimal impact on the street. And then for the judges and for service, there's a separate entry off of Broadway so that this is all totally secure and separate. And allows us to have very, very few vehicular crossings of the sidewalk. So most of this block now will be pedestrian favored. So as I mentioned, that this cube geometry, the square plan and square elevation, allows us to have a very substantial setback, 50 feet being a preferred setback. You can see that all of our setbacks are actually greater than that to the basic facade. But in fact, the real setback to the major structure is even greater, about 90 feet as a minimum and close to 100 feet for most of it. And this is made possible through a very unique structure in which Mark Sarkeesian and our colleagues at SOM and our structure group developed a scheme in which these four legs, if you will, these four rectangles, are part of the basic core of the building that rise up as legs that support the structure coming up to the top to a hat truss, and I'll show you how that works. As I mentioned, the future office building, federal office building, is on 2nd Street. So without the federal office building, we have a site like this, which is kind of a visual park, I guess. In the future, it'll probably be something about this scale. So in terms of the experience of the building itself, we, of course, wanted to make this very much a welcoming and very civic gesture, one that's really simple and we hope timeless. This very basic platonic solid, a cube, that is literally floating above this civic landscape. And so you see the floor glass facade, you see the north entry there, and looking down and onto this plaza off of First Street with a stone base which is held within, a shaded base in Los Angeles is very, very important in the entry itself. You begin to see sort of the seal here and the graphics identify the building, and very importantly at the base as you approach, wrapping around the entire building on the frieze is our quotes, which is yet to be selected finally by the judges, but that will convey certain basic tenets of our democracy, and so that will be carved into this, in this case, the metal base that the glass rests upon, just above the stone there. As you can see it carved in here, and they'll be softly lit in the evening. So this will be a very key part of bringing our human and our own democratic experience to the street as part of this. Within this, the light core I mentioned within will come down of course, down to ground level. We've just gone through the art selection. This will be a site also for major monumental art, both on the wall and perhaps also a sculpture. You can see through here barely. It's kind of white out on this particular screen, unfortunately, but to the courtyard beyond, and the civic steps that bring you up to the special proceedings courtroom that I mentioned below. So up above you then are all of the courtrooms. The typical plan, as I mentioned, 4 courtrooms per floor, and I think probably everyone here knows how these things work. Interestingly, we have 5 judges' chambers per floor, so you can see instantly that these are not these courtrooms are not the sole proprietorship of any one judge. These courtrooms are used by more than one judge, and as part of the efficiency necessity of making this building work within their budget, and I think it's probably going to be more and more a part of what we see federal courthouses going forward in the United States. So most of those are at the corners, the jury deliberations, and of course in custody holdings. There's vertical circulation that's shared between these 2 courtrooms are a key part of it, and the secure circulation you can see there in the blue pieces are for the judges, so they never encounter the public circulation, which is there you see in the green elevators, and the yellow is where the public goes. So those of course are kept entirely separate. So we have basically 3 forms of vertical circulation. We have in custody, which is in red. We have the sort of the light blue, which are the secure circulation for the judges, and finally the green for the public. So these are kept, again, the challenge here, of course, especially in trying to keep the cost of a project like this down, is trying to maximize the efficiency of this while providing these 3 levels of security within the courthouse. So in supporting the mission of the courthouse, we wanted to first of all make this the typical floor one that is publicly active, and so you can see public circulation around as opposed to linear circulation. It also makes it easier to secure. Very importantly, we added this piece, which is not part of the program. We had to figure out a way to make it efficient enough to allow this special program piece to happen. So every 2 floors, we have what we call an informal waiting area. It's connected by a staircase. So these are double story spaces in section, facing north to the street. So this is where light comes through into this center light court both from the street as well as from above. And these are places that are accessible by all of every courtroom ring wrapping around, and they provide places that are kind of we call them decompression rooms or informal waiting spaces that we actually pitched it to the judges. This be a place that would actually help them have settlements happen before going into court, so therefore it would reduce their caseload. We'll see what happens, but the idea is to provide a place that is amenable to families and groups to come together, and perhaps even for lawyers and plaintiffs and defendants to even come together to perhaps reach an agreement outside of the courtroom itself before perhaps having to go to trial. So these spaces we think are very important, kind of a new amenity for a courthouse, and they provide a place to relax and to come together and to look out to the city as well as back into the light court. So looking at a courtroom itself, here's a detailed plan of it, and I'm sure everyone here knows how these work, that a sound lock door comes off of the public corridor. This is the light court side. Exterior walls is to the left there. We have organized this so the judge is, of course, right here, centered on the bench, with a very direct axial connection from the front door entry, the pair of doors, into the courtroom itself. So that axial relationship was really important. The other thing is we get light then, you'll see in a moment, from this side as well as from the exterior side into the courtroom itself. This is a very early concept. The courtroom looks very little like this now. I think it's much improved over what we showed originally, but you'll see light from the back side as well as from this side, so that we've actually canted the ceilings and the structure for every one of these. So we bring light in over the lawyer's caucus space, the 2 small conference rooms between the light court and inside, and likewise the millwork on the other side, the bench side, to bring light in from both the inside light court as well as from the exterior. And so we've done a number of tests with this, and a surprising amount of illumination necessary to operate the courtroom is provided simply by natural light. And it's allowed us to reduce the amount of lighting, of course LED lighting, but we've been able to reduce the amount of lighting in this space based upon this particular design. Now what you don't see here yet, and maybe it's the subject of another talk sometime, is the way we develop the courtroom now is really trying to use that light to the maximum to enrich the edges. So we now are looking at like the exterior, but in a much more delicate way, a kind of folded walls on the two sides that reflect light and shadow in a very delicate way within the courtroom itself. I think it would be quite good when finished. So judges' chambers, again, they occupy the corners, designed for maximum views, and you can see these triangular windows that block the sun on one side and allow light in from the other side. There are some important things here in the vertical organization. You can see the courtrooms shown in blue here, and then the U.S. Marshal and the clerk public space on level 4, 3, and 4. And all the public accessible things are really we've tried to make them as low in the building as possible with as much direct access as possible. Loading and service is, I won't spend any time on this, but it's all very secure. Lobby level plan, and some special courtrooms, which I don't think I need to spend time on. It's very important that some of these spaces are actually designed to be convertible in the future to new courtrooms. So, for example, here you see the basic structure for the building it runs through, and we've tried to be very, very rigorous in the location of cores and structures so that to minimize any fixed elements that might prevent convertibility in the future. So here's actually the marshal's floor as currently organized. It's possible in the future for the marshals to move out of this space into the adjacent federal office building if and when it's built, and at that time to take this exact same footprint you can see here and convert it from this space into a typical courtroom space to add 4 courtrooms within the existing envelope of the building. So that was a very, very important part of long-term efficiency. At the very top we have a special multi-defendant courtroom. A lot of gang trials in Los Angeles, and that's where this will take place. At the very top of the building. Finally, in the very top of this building, I'll show you this hat truss here in a moment, but we have a kind of, we'll call it a found space, which literally is like an attic, in which we were able to place a huge amount of the back of house elements, a lot of which is storage for archival purposes and for issues that require archival storage. And so this allowed us to make extraordinary efficient use of this building overall volume. And this was important because we found that actually after we'd finished the design, we found that one of the issues that Congress had very clearly stated with the GSA is that this building shall not be larger than whatever, like 630,000 square feet or something like that. And it said basically somewhere, it's sort of vague to say, but not much more than 600,000 square feet is what was stated. Mm-hmm. Well, we frankly erroneously thought, well, as long as we're meeting the budget, more space is better, right? So we had a building that was 700,000 square feet, and one of the very careful, meticulous people in the GSA was going through and adding things up and said, wait a minute, we have a problem here because you're at 700,000 square feet, and Congress will only approve 630. So, well, it's in the budget. It doesn't matter, because with Tea Party, anything that could stop this project, the Congress would do. So we had to come back and redesign, and the building, as you see here, actually does reflect some changes at the base. It allows us to really open the base up more. We had a couple of other pavilions coming out. By placing this all up in the attic, we saved space, and we got a better design out of it as well. So it was a very happy coincidence, not a coincidence, a lot of very hard work, and frankly sweating bullets. And we have the three directors in our Los Angeles office, Michael Mann and Paul Dana and Jose Palacios. The 3 people really leading this, that working on this with me, are just really brilliant architects, and I have to give them credit. They figured it out. And so it would save the day. Anyway, so we're about just under 625,000 square feet for the project. So again, the 3 lines of circulation. Now this is, I think, kind of an interesting point. Here's the basic structure for the building. What you see there in blue are actually, as you can see, reinforced concrete walls. These are solid elements that contain much of the vertical circulation, vertical core elements, and air and so forth. And so around the perimeter, we have steel columns, but unlike a usual steel column, these columns are not in compression. They're actually in tension. So they're very lightweight. and they are redundant in the sense that if one of them gets knocked out by anything, an airplane, a bomb, or anything else, its neighbor will take up the slack. And so the way this works, the foundation is a mat foundation on which these four great legs stand of concrete, very, very strong and very, very far away from the street. In top of this, raised as far away from the thread as possible, very, very top, is this steel hat truss from which these steel columns are suspended or hung. And these columns actually carry each of the floors and allow us to have a very lightweight structure, one that has this redundancy, as I mentioned, and also places the major structure as far away from threat as it can be. And of course, seismic is a key issue here. So we've analyzed all this. We have some dampeners that are part of this that help us to take up some of the forces in the truss and analyze the complete displacement. But through this system, you can see that a very remarkable reduction in both in building displacement, movement in earthquake, but also a very substantial reduction in the structural material necessary to support the building. So sustainability from an environmental point of view also is really critical. This was the program, 47 kPTUs per square foot per year was the site use intensity goal. The energy and water reductions, you can see 30% and 20% over code. And we employed, working with Siska and Hennessy as our mechanical engineers, we've employed a number of strategies. The basic ones, of course, about using ultra-low flow plumbing fixtures and harvesting water, as I mentioned, and using condensate recovery to use for much of our irrigation and toilet flushing, and finally to use rooftop rainwater harvesting into cisterns to also collect water to use for flushing. And energy, again, first of all, reducing the load through the envelope design, which you saw. After we've done the reduce as far as we can, then we are adding harvesting additional energy through photovoltaics. And we're using a tri-gen plant to both generate heat and chilling. Through all this, we've basically been able to, you can see, substantially reduce the actual consumption over what the goals were that GSA set. We're still actually working on the site use intensity to get even 47 kBTUs were their goal. We're at 42. We're actually pushing this to try to get down to 35 kBTUs. Energy, you can see 44% reduction instead of 30, and a 35% reduction in water fixture use, and 100% in irrigation. So carbon equivalent, you can see, is a very substantial reduction in terms of overall carbon production for this project. And there are ways, by the way, that this is sort of a long-term goal to get to zero by roughly speaking, or to get to 35, I should say, by 2020. The issue is that to get down there, we need, you can see now in 2016, we need to be way down, close to, I don't know, whatever it is, somewhere around, well, close to 35. So anyway, so in order to make this target is quite a challenge, and but we're actually coming very close to we think, to hitting it. We also have ways of actually, this project is convertible to using biomass fuels, so it would have net zero energy consumption at that point in time in terms of renewables. So here's the path to zero. As I mentioned, here's what we're doing. We convert it to a biofuel tri-gen. Right now, biofuels, as you probably know, are way too expensive and not available adequately. So when it is available, we can do that and get to net zero. It'll be a LEED Platinum, well above LEED Platinum building. So as I mentioned, the idea is to make this a very kind of minimalist, simple building that will be a timeless in its form, and very luminous. And this very simple study model simply shows this idea of this simple luminous cube that will define it. We are doing glass. We've got full-scale glass mock-ups now. This is actually a picture of one of them. Where we're also studying, this is actually a full-scale piece, but studying the way light moves across this during the day, and you can see the kind of the richness and complexity of shade and shadow and light as the sunlight plays across this facade. I think will be quite good. So, oops, I'll try to do this one as well. But you can see the vertical screens within these create shadow back on the hypotenuse as well as collect sunlight as it moves through. So I think it'll be a very interesting building as you see light move across it during the day. So that's a very, very detailed summary of what we're doing in Los Angeles. It was 10 years from the first time around to the first competition until they kind of gave up. It's been 10 months now since we awarded this to it's in construction. We think it's going to be a very handsome addition to the civic domain there. It did just recently, just a week ago, win a Los Angeles AIA award for an as yet unbuilt building. So with that, I'll close, and happy to answer any questions you may have. Steve. Yes. Yeah. Well, as everyone knows, there are always things you would never, ever anticipate, no matter how clear things seem. And I would say that regarding design build, first of all, it's really, really critical which partner you choose. Our first relationship with Clark Construction was back about 15 years ago when we won also a design competition for the state office building here in San Francisco. And that was a very, very careful process of selection. We talked to many contractors and tried to understand what their attitudes were and approach was. And through that process, we've gained a sort of mutual trust, which is really important. And one of the things I've found is that you have to be extremely open and collaborative. You have to, each step of the way, it's not just reporting to the judges and the GSA. You have to make sure that your builder partner is fully on board, has vetted every idea to make sure it really falls in the budget, so this you kind of, if you've been through this process a few times, you find that in a typical design bid situation, you do a design and inflation happens, various things happen. You find by the time you get to working drawings, you got to do value engineering, and you got to really painfully cut things back. And or sometimes even when the bids come in, there's things happen. So in the design build, the great thing about it is that you don't have these problems that goes out because the guys, people your partner are building it. You do take your licks in the beginning though. So right in the very, very early concept is where it's really the toughest. And so that working together was important. As far as lessons learned, I guess one lesson learned is make sure you read the contract very carefully about what they say the area should be and the budget should be. And even if you think you're giving them a good deal, just do what they say, because we're lucky to have been able to have made that reduction. But I think the other thing is some of you perhaps worked on courthouses, and judges, like I guess the other professional group would be doctors, maybe lawyers as well, have a reputation for being sometimes really tough clients and opinionated and so on. And they are obviously very opinionated. That's what they're paid to do. But we've had a very, very, very positive relationship with every group of judges we worked with, and it has to do with having some flexibility to try to see things through someone else's eyes when you're doing these designs. It's hard to do when you've worked very hard in design and someone doesn't like a detail. But it's always important to be able to just sort of stand back, kind of try to look through someone else's eyes at this and try to be flexible. And that's gone a long way for us. In the end, we've frankly kind of gotten what we wanted. But the importance of working through alternatives and really demonstrating why something may work or may not work is important. Good question, Jesse. Yes? Look at what use? Plug load, yes, absolutely. So the question was, so in addition to the skin and what else do we look at? And I will say the skin and also the building mass was also part of that in order to make it as compact as possible. But the question was, what about plug load? And that obviously is part of it too. And that's, of course, the one thing you really can't really control, because the occupants are going to do what they want to do. We are doing right now a net zero, I think it's the first net zero public school, I'm not sure, K through 6 public school in New York City, net zero, and it's completely wrapped in photovoltaics. But the issue of plug loads is a very, very significant issue, because a teacher comes in, they have a coffee pot they want to plug in, and someone else has whatever, the computers, whatever you name it. We use a lot of energy through our personal appliances and things. So that's a key part of it. So we and actually more importantly, GSA spent a lot of time talking with the judges about what the expectations are for use of this building. Another big issue was lighting inside the courtrooms, and I talked about natural light. The judges, we've had to show them other examples, and we're still working through that. We're going to do a full-scale mock-up of the courtroom with finishes before final signing off on this. And we've already done very super large-scale models to demonstrate light levels, but they're very, very aware of and concerned about the level of light they'll have in these courtrooms, because we are designing the lights, the LED lights, to take into account the contribution we get from daylight. And obviously there are certain times during the evening when you can't do that. So they have to be able to work within, this very carefully controlled lighting area. So user behavior is a very, as you pointed out, a very important part of that. And that's education. As an architect, I'm not sure how you actually make that happen, but is a critical part of it. Good. Great. I think not. I think it's time for wine food. Thank you.
I think the hardest thing about that project must be the politics, just to get it built. I'd like to thank Siska for providing the refreshments and the food tonight, and there's more if you'd like to partake. And I'd like to remind to sign up if you want to be on our AAJ newsletter list. There's a list out there, and also if you want learning units, to sign up at the desk. So thank you very much for coming.